So it's definitely a path. Hopefully it's the right path. It's been a good one so far. So yeah, I'm Brendan. I'm from Seek. So today we're going to pull back a little bit from just focusing on observability and talk about this more broad problem of the continuous software delivery, and talk about how we're solving that at Seek today by looking at how we did it a few years ago, which was probably described as a bit of a hot mess, and how we've evolved into what we refer to as the Paved Road for delivery. So I work in a part of Seek that we call Technology Platforms team. So we're a group of teams that sit within the software engineering organisation, and it's our job to think about all of the challenges that are common to all of our software engineering teams and look at using leverage and lift to solve those in consistent ways. And overall to balance this idea of the autonomy we give teams with the alignment that we'd like them to have as well. So this idea of the Paved Road is not something that was invented at Seek. You may have heard companies like Netflix use that term to refer to their own approach to internal tooling and platforms as well. And it has a pretty similar meaning at Seek as well. So to understand how things look today, it's kind of helpful to have a look back at where we've come from. So I arrived at Seek circa 2014, and we had a fairly standard sort of lift and shift approach to our journey to the cloud. We had, from a technology or an architecture point of view, something that was fairly simple, a couple of big .NET monolithic applications sitting either side of our employment marketplace, some SQL servers in between them, and a whole lot of contention around that. And that led to this, that contention led to this phenomenon that we refer to as backlog coupling. So what we mean by that is that we have examples of one team's not really able to make forward progress towards their goals without another team sort of refactoring their own backlog and making some progress themselves. That meant that ultimately our speed to market was not where we wanted it to be, and there was a bit of an acute focus on that around this time because we were seeing more competition from companies that we would probably not naturally identify as more mature software engineering organisations. So understanding that all models are wrong, but some are helpful, our hypothesis on our way forward was based on this particular wrong but helpful model. So we were reasoning that the speed to market that we were observing was largely or could largely be predicted by the autonomy that we were giving to our software engineering teams. From the point of view of a software engineer at Seek, this would have been fairly intuitive. We would have been spending quite a bit of time, making broad changes across lots of different code bases, trying to get time from lots of teams to do code reviews and things like that. Sometimes code that was ready to ship would wait for a centralised team to review it and shepherd it through to production. And so our initial response to this was to go the whole 9 yards. We split the engineering organisation down into smaller teams that were focused on specific problems that our customers were trying to solve themselves. We embedded DevOps engineers into those teams. We gave them probably more AWS accounts than they would know what to do with, and we sort of just said, have at it. The only thing that we wanted in response to that was to have, as those teams started to discover solutions to common problems, that they'd come back and share them with one another. So our hope there was to have an engineering organisation that was populated by bright and passionate people that were building and sharing solutions to common problems together. So here's an example of what we actually got. So very early on, we decided that CloudFormation was as good a way as any to deploy infrastructure as code to AWS, but there's some rough edges in the CLI, so these helpful bash scripts appeared and people started to use those, which was great. We had teams that were all in on the JavaScript ecosystem, and they said, bash is not for us, so promptly rewrote CFN deployer in JavaScript. We had teams that were into the shiny new Google programming languages, so we ended up with the same thing written again in Go. There weren't enough parentheses in these other versions for the Lisp purists, so CFN deployer closure it came into being, and finally we jumped the shark with this thing called evaporate. So we have this little axiom that says that when you see Haskell in production, you go and have a poke, you have a look to see what's really going on there. So the reality was that these were the numbers that we'd arrived at. So we had about 30 engineering teams, give or take, 185 microservices in our production environments. They were deployed to about 120 VPCs that were glued together in this rat's nest of peering connections. And that's a modest estimate, at least 15 different ways of deploying those things into AWS. There were some other notable observations that we made at this time, and that was things like each of these teams was actually making pretty similar decisions around the technology they were using. So Datadog was something that was pretty common. PagerDuty, obviously everyone was in on AWS, but they were all doing the work that was required to glue those things together into what we'd consider to be like production-ready, bulletproof systems. Some teams had invested quite a lot in that type of work, and it paid off for them in terms of much more predictable deployments, faster speed to market for them, all those sort of healthy metrics. Other teams had maintained their focus more on sort of the business goals that they had and the problems they were solving for their customers. And those teams didn't have the same uplift in those important indicators of performance. Often the things that people would learn, some of the teams would learn related to this common tool, the tools that they had, they weren't really that transportable. We couldn't transpose a lesson from one team to another, and that was mostly just due to the different choices, local choices that the teams had made. From the perspective of teams who cared about sort of the whole picture, so a security team, for example, who want to understand whether or not we adhere well to a policy across the entire ecosystem, it was very difficult, almost impossible for them to do that. And we had this overwhelming sense that we were really going about what we call paving the cow path here. So most of the effort was going into polishing very makeshift solutions, and what we were doing there was informed by whatever sort of the last thing that went wrong was, rather than being able to take a step back and think more holistically and more strategically about what the overall needs of the organisation were when it came to the problem or the common problem of continuous delivery. So in business terms, we describe it as this. So we've created a tax on all the technology initiatives or the engineering initiatives that involve integration and engineering workforce mobility, so for the business speak there. But basically what that means is projects that require lots of integration of systems and the freedom of movement for engineers to be able to move to the parts of the problem where they can have most impact. Those became the hardest projects for us to do. And it was also noticeable that most of the really strategically important projects required these types of things to be able to be easy to do. So I mentioned earlier that we did know that some teams had made some investment in having tools and standards for continuous delivery. And the other thing we noticed about those tools is that over time, they'd kind of deteriorate in terms of the value that they were providing. And that was often because the team would go back to putting their focus on what they were really there to do, which was providing value to their customers. So they went back to solving the business problems. So we learned that having those tools was a good thing, but we also realised that we needed a more sustainable way to ensure that we'd continue to get value from them over time. And we decided that the way we usually do these things at Seek is we make it a group of people's job to wake up every day and think about that particular problem. So we decided to put a team together who would be dedicated to building and supporting these kinds of tools for the whole engineering organisation to use. And we referred to that team as the Paved Road team. And so this was their mission, so to help all software engineers to succeed by designing, building, supporting tools, platforms that allow them to focus on what it is that they do best, which is shipping great code, great products to hirers and candidates. So our proposal initially was just to pull a very small team together, 3 or 4 really passionate people, and prove out the value of this approach over 6 months. We wanted to show that providing common tools to these problems, treating them like real products, having a team that, as I said, wakes up every day and tries to improve them, we could actually increase the focus that our engineering teams were giving to their customers. So to justify the investment here, we actually did a little bit of back of the napkin maths, back of the envelope maths, and we realised we'd probably need to save around 3 to 4 hours a month per software engineer to break even on this investment. Because we wanted to do this in 6 months, rather than sort of building everything from scratch, we actually went out into the teams and grabbed some of these existing tools with a view to using those as the starting points to build more generalised versions. So some of these tools we thought really had legs. They just needed to sort of break free from the opinions or the specifics of the team that originally built them, and that's the approach that we took there. We also developed a few principles for the team to live by, and I'll share those with you now, and these also helped to set some expectations with the rest of the software engineering teams as to what to expect when working with the Paved Road. So the first one is that the Paved Road team's not a central or embedded DevOps team. So those are two sort of fairly comfortable team topologies. So our aim is always to stay off everyone else's critical path. As we mentioned earlier, backlog coupling is actually the worst coupling. So we empower teams to achieve their own goals, and we do that by building self-service tools and capabilities. We don't do things for them. So this was quite challenging at first. Definitely that mode of working is quite uncomfortable to some of the people that joined the team early on, because they were individuals who had sort of been the doers in the teams they came from. They were maybe experts, they valued sort of the possession of that knowledge. They were the one person that knew how the CI pipeline or whatever worked, and they needed to switch mindset to be thinking more about how can I listen to a problem, understand what's common about it, and build something that gives the team the power to improve it themselves. The next principle is that tools that are built by the Paved Road team they're treated like real products. What this just means is that we have things like actual customer-focused feedback mechanisms. So we do surveys, we interview people, we do proper support. In the before times that was in person. Now it's predominantly just via Slack. We take documentation very seriously, so we write documentation to the standard that you could reasonably expect from a vendor product or a good mature open source project. And we also facilitate actual training sessions with the teams, and we'll pull vendors in as it's relevant too. So we've done some days with AWS and things like that. So engineering teams are our customers, and they are actually free to choose to use anything they want. This is really important. Again, something that is a bit uncomfortable at first, but super, super important to maintaining the sense of autonomy that our teams have. So at Seek, we have a communal process, an internal RFC process. That's how we collaboratively make decisions about common problems, and specifically about the attributes that good solutions to those common problems should have. And they're non-prescriptive, so they don't specifically say which tool to use. Teams are empowered to go and find the right tool for them to solve those common problems in a way that aligns well to what those RFCs say. It's the job of the Paved Road team to give options to the teams, build tools for the teams that genuinely represent sort of best choice or first choice options. Nothing is mandated here. So while we're the custodians of the tools, everyone is encouraged to contribute. So another really important principle, and for a couple of reasons. And the first one is, this is one of the concrete ways that we reduce that backlog coupling. So we said we don't want teams to be sitting around waiting for the Paved Road team. So if some of these tools don't meet a particular use case, we need and we encourage teams to be able to turn up, raise pull requests, and get those features into those tools so that everyone can benefit from them. Paved Road team is there to do things like help out with design decisions, review pull requests, merge them. Ultimately, they become the long-term maintainers of that code. Secondly, the other reason this is important is that it helps to build trust between the engineering teams who are our customers and the Paved Road team itself. And that trust comes from teams feeling genuinely empowered to actually influence what's happening in the tools, what the feature sets that are actually getting rolled out to everybody are. And they're not waiting for those things to come down. They don't need to influence the Paved Road team. So I do want to talk a little bit about observability. It'd be remiss of me not to at an event, a Datadog event. There's a couple of perspectives on observability here. So the first perspective is that of the Paved Road team itself. So we use observability tools like Datadog to understand how effectively the tools that we're building for our customers are actually helping them to solve the problems they're trying to solve with those. So we achieve this we instrument all the tooling, and we measure things like how many teams are actually choosing to use one of our particular tools. How long after rolling out a new version do we see good adoption of that version? That's really helpful because it helps us decide things like the frequency of updates versus the size of updates and so forth. We don't want people to be forever grinding on updating the tools themselves that they're using. We look also at what commands, what parts of the tools are most commonly resulting in errors. So we'll use that as evidence of perhaps something that may be a little bit hard to hold, hard to use, and that helps us to prioritise some ergonomic things that we could improve for everybody. But we also measure some higher order metrics, some things that tell us how we're doing tracking towards our overall purpose, which is to help to let teams focus back on their customers. And so those are things like how much more frequently are our users of our tools deploying today than they were, say, 6 months ago. What are the sort of the change failure rates look like now compared to, again, sort of 6 to 12 months ago, and so on. So these much higher order metrics. From the perspective of our customers, though, and the customers of the Paved Road team, that is, observability presents some different unique challenges. And this most likely or potentially unique to Seek. It's related to that sort of fragmentation and chaos that I mentioned at the start of the presentation. So some of this challenge may or may not be familiar to some of you. So to help explain it, I've just put this truism up here, which is that autonomous teams and distributed systems still need that shared context. You're going to see shared context a lot. I've just picked up from watching the other presentations, in order to evolve and to succeed. So we think about how the value streams of the software that we ship actually require communication integration between all of the technical components that make up the distributed system, and also between the teams that support those components. Those teams need a good, solid understanding of how everything's working to know that it's working as intended. And our experience was that leaving this unchecked, we sort of had arrived at a point where the type of overall communication, this shared context, was really difficult because our teams tended to evolve towards very locally optimal ways of communicating rather than towards more sort of globally optimal contexts, ways to share information between teams. So we think that observability tools like Datadog are really key to helping solve this particular problem. Now, we're not there yet, it's very early on our journey here, but we think that they can help give our autonomous teams a consistent way to explore the overall system and improve their shared understanding of how everything is actually working together. And we think that's important because everything actually working together is how our users actually experience our systems. So we hope that when our customers are, say, applying for a job on Seek or posting a job on Seek, that it's not obvious to them that they're interacting with 5 discrete systems that were built by 3 very different teams. So to demonstrate this idea, before we kind of tackled this problem or integrated observability into a Paved Road tooling, this is maybe what we might see if we spun up some, if we looked at what a team was doing in terms of APM. So this is a trace of a request to a microservice that's responsible for saving attachments to job applications. Probably does the job locally for the team. They know what their SLOs look like and so on, but it's devoid of any context of what's actually going on around this request. So we can't really tell whether this attachment was being created when someone was first applying for a job, or perhaps the job application happened last week and this is just someone refreshing their CV or something like that. Now that's admittedly a lot more interesting if this were an error. There's obviously a very different impact on an end user if they're flat out unable to apply for a job versus they applied for the job and maybe they've just got an out-of-date CV against it. We care about both those things, but we care differently about both those things. So to help break out of this sort of observability silo, we could call it, our Paved Road tools can make it really, really easy and effortless for engineering teams to deploy their applications in a way that's observable, but contributing all of their observability data to the bigger picture, without them needing to get bogged down in the details of, how am I going to actually deploy an agent and what should my configuration look like, what are the API keys, what are the conventions I need to use, what instrumentation should I have, and so on. So this is what the same interaction would look like today, assuming we've deployed out the microservices using all the Paved Road tooling. So we've got a lot richer flame graph there, and I can use a little bit of tribal knowledge to know that, okay, this is someone actually applying for a job for the first time and attaching the first version of their CV. So we care very much about that particular interaction. So to wrap things up, I wanted to refresh with the numbers that we saw before and give you an idea of how things have actually changed since those days. So if you recall, we had 30 engineering teams, 185 APIs, 120 VPCs. That one makes me particularly sad. 15 different ways of deploying into AWS. And today, this is where we're at. So we've got more engineering teams. It's probably actually a lot. It probably grew by 3 since I started talking to you. We've got more APIs in production, only one way to deploy them, a much simpler application network. And we're deploying really, really frequently and at a really great success rate. So thanks for listening today. I really love learning about how other organisations solve these problems. So if any of you want to catch up and have a chat about your own stories or experiences, I'd love to hear them. And thanks very much for listening.